Thank you. Good morning, afternoon, whatever it is where you are. I'm going to, well, let me first look at this slide that we're showing. That's just a quick introduction to the layout of Maestro 11 for those of you who haven't been attending previous seminars. I'm not going to go into it in any detail. I will be talking today about the Workspace Navigator, which you can see over on the left here. So in fact, I'm now going to share my Maestro so that you can see it. There we go. Are you seeing Maestro? Yes. Okay. So the Workspace Navigator is over here on the left. It appears in most cases when you first start Maestro. If it, for some reason, doesn't appear, the only reason it wouldn't appear is if you closed it while you were in Maestro last time. If it isn't there and you want to see it, you can go up to your window menu and choose the Workspace Navigator item in the window menu, or you can press Control-E or Command-E on the Mac. Now you might wonder why Control-E for Workspace Navigator. It's an old mnemonic. It's just for the entry list because the Workspace Navigator is actually a two-part pane that consists of the entry list and the structure hierarchy. And the structure hierarchy is the new part, but I'm going to be going over the entry list a bit for new users. The entry list is a representation of all the entries in your project, like your project table, which we haven't taken away. The entry list represents every entry in your project, but it's a mini version of the project table, so it mostly focuses on working with the workspace. The properties are hidden unless you ask for them. So these entries, you can use them to manage the entries like you would in the project table, but the focus here is on including them in the workspace or excluding them from the workspace, working with them in the workspace. The structure hierarchy reflects only those entries that are currently in the workspace, and it gives you a structural view. First, it breaks the structure down by type, and then within the types, if there's a hierarchy of the structures, it shows you that. For instance, in the protein, it goes chain and so forth. I'll be going into that in much more detail. So in terms of your workflow, you're going to want to start by deciding what entries you want to see in the workspace and including them here using the entry list. And the inclusion column is where you would go to do that. The blue dot means it's included in the workspace. The empty dot means it's excluded or not included in the workspace. And you can simply choose which one you want to include like that, just by clicking. But if you wanted to include more than one, you would use Control-click or Command-click on the Mac and include multiple ones like that. And you also use Control-click to exclude. So if you didn't really want the waters, so forth. You can also do a range inclusion, we call it. So if you click and then you do a shift click on the next one, you get all of them, and you could keep going with shift click. So that's your basic inclusion exclusion. I should note, if you don't have to be right inside the circle. Anywhere on the cell will work also. Now, sometimes you want, it's cool that you can just click to change between entries, but sometimes you want to keep one entry in the workspace while you work with other entries. So for instance, if you have your receptor and you want to keep that fixed in the workspace while you look at different ligands, there is a way to do that. You right-click on that, say Show Workspace Fixed Within Project, and now you have this little pin icon, which means this thing is pinned to the workspace, and you can just click into another entry here and include that without holding down the Control key. If you can fix more than one entry, so if you have a reference ligand as well, you can fix that. So now I have 2 fixed entries. And you can, of course, unfix them by going back to that menu and either including them, which means unfix in this case, or excluding them entirely. So I'll just leave that one included. Where am I? Okay, so locking is another option that you can do here. That some people get confused between fix and lock. So I want you to think about fixing as a pinning action. You're pinning this to the workspace. Now locking is the option of making something not editable. And it's represented by a lock icon, and you get a banner to let you know. And the point here is that you may want to work with just the ligand and not worry about accidentally modifying your protein. You may have a reference ligand that you want to lock so that when you're working with your other ligand, you don't accidentally change your reference ligand. There's a side effect of, or not even a side effect, another use case for locking, which is that you can't even select entries that are locked. So right now, if I do the big marquee over this whole thing, all I'm selecting is the ligand. So you can see there's just the one residue. And that's really convenient because the marqueing is useful, but it often picks up things you don't want. To unlock the, I should say that when it's locked and you can see in the structure hierarchy, it's disabled because you really can't do much with it. But you can, one kind of nice thing is you can unlock it by double clicking there. You can also, of course, lock it, if it's locked, you can lock it just by doing that as well. Now, I'm going through this really fast, I'm sorry, but it's because a lot of this is going to be familiar. One of the other icons that just you might be noticing right now is this S icon here in the entry list. And the S means that this entry has at least one surface associated with it. And you can say, well, I don't see any surfaces. Well, if you click on the S, you'll see there are two surfaces, but they're not being shown at the moment. So you can make them visible that way, one or both. You can hide them all like that. Highlight. And when this one is visible here, the workspace as a whole knows about it, and you'll see this icon light up. So just as a reminder, if you ever come into your project and it's you see the S but you don't see any surfaces visible, the first thing to do is check in here to make sure that in fact this is toggled on. And if it is toggled on and you still don't see the surfaces, it may be that this was toggled off here. So something to keep in mind. Now while I was showing you the fix and lock, you probably noticed that I actually selected or right-clicked on these things and got this blue highlight. The blue highlight is a selection highlight. It says that this entry is selected. You can select entries that aren't even included. So I could actually lock this entry right now, even though it's not included. In fact, all the actions in the right-click menu work on selection. And selection works in similarly to inclusion in terms of select one at a time, or you can do a range selection with shift-click, or you can do individual, adding to the selection with control-click, or you can deselect with control-click. But I will point out that you should deselect from the row column, because right now if you try to deselect in here, you go into an editor. You don't want to do that. So if you're trying to deselect, just control-click on the row number, and that will deselect it. And while we're talking about inclusion and selection, there's a very cool trick that I don't think that many people know about, which is based on our e-player. So suppose you have a receptor and you want to look at a bunch of different proteins, a bunch of different ligands against that, docked against that protein. And you don't want to have to sit there and go click, click, click. There's actually a quick way to do this, which is if you select the ligand and then shift-click and select the others, now you have your ligands, only your ligands selected. One of them is included. Now you can use your right and left arrow keys on your keyboard to step through them without having to click. You can see my cursor isn't near them. When you get to the bottom, you can use your left arrow key. And this works even if they are not contiguously selected. You can keep going. It will jump to the next selected entry. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's kind of a cool trick. Okay. So everything I've shown you so far is actually available in the project table as well, because as I said, the entry list is essentially a subset of the project table. So one of the things you might want to do is add more properties from the project table into your entry list. One of the ones that some of our users have mentioned is the entry ID, because that's used by some of the scientific applications. So suppose you wanted to add the entry ID to your entry list, you can go to the All Properties. Okay, I don't know, I went kind of fast. You can click on this little gear icon, choose Show Property, make sure that All Properties is here, and then select Entry ID. And now it gets added to your entry list. If you want to remove it, you can right-click and say Hide. That's just another useful little trick. And finally, there's one feature here that you saw probably noticed next to the gear icon, there's a search icon. That is not, the searching and filtering options are available here, and they aren't available on the project table. So you can type in ligand to find all your ligands, and then clear that search. And then, or you can filter, the choices are filtering by included or selected or by something you define. By default, it's included, so I can click there to show just my included items. And you see the little funnel is bright blue. Now if I click it again, I get all my entries back. And if I change it to selected, let me select another one here. I will only get the selected whether they're included or not. And again, I can uncheck that. Oh, sorry. So now if you look at, now I have two entries included, and if you look at the structure hierarchy, it reflects those two entries. It doesn't care about the selection. And you can review what's in those entries by opening up these little folders. I'm going to move to this structure because it's got a lot of interesting items in it. For instance, it has an other category. So this complex, let me make it appear here. This complex has a ligand, two chains, waters and other solvents, which in this case are glycerols, and it has some metals and ions. So you can look at that. Every time you import a new structure, you can look at it this way and try to find out what's in it. As you may see, the lowest level, we don't go down to the atom level. There's no folder next to the ligand here, and there's each water is just a water. We don't go down to the atom level. So we go down to the residue and small molecule level. And you can select items at any level. So I can select all of chain A, or I can select the entire protein. Speaking of which, chain L appears to be hidden. Or I can select a ligand, and I can also double click to zoom. So any of these that I want to zoom to, if I want to locate a particular water, I can zoom over there. It's a very useful little trick. Selection within the tree works, as I showed you with selection in the entry list. You can select a range of waters by clicking here, and if you want to locate those, you can use it to the selection to find them and sort of see them up here. You might notice, and control click and so forth works, so I can deselect individual things from here. So you can build up very complex selections here, like I might pick a few waters and chain A, and that's my selection. You don't have to use our atom selection dialog for that sort of thing. You might notice that there's two shades of blue on the selection. There's the very bright blue, and there's this kind of duller gray blue. And what that means is that at the folder level, if the entire folder is not selected, that is, some of the children are not selected, in this case, only some of the waters are selected, you'll see that it's a dull gray to let you know that some are selected, but not all of them. If all of them are selected, then the folder level will also be bright blue. And this is useful for when they're closed up. You can see that I have all my waters selected, but not all my solvents. And you can use the highlight in the tree to identify items that you selected over here. So for instance, if I select part of a residue and I'm wondering what residue is that, I mean, obviously I can do it from the status bar, but if you have a bunch of residues, you can actually get a sense of where they are in the protein and so on by just browsing here, and you'll find, see, it's kind of cool. And I should mention, as you saw, when I selected in the workspace, it also highlighted the structure in the structure hierarchy. But in this case, I didn't select the entire residue, and yet it looks like the entire residue is selected here, and that's because we don't go down to the atom level. So as long as one atom is selected in a residue or a ligand, the highlight will appear as if it's fully selected. So when in doubt, just click here to do the full selection. And as you can see, it's all selected now, including the hidden hydrogens. Speaking of hidden hydrogens, we have these visibility toggles here along the left edge. And again, this looks like it's fully visible because it doesn't go down to the atom level. As long as one atom is visible, this thing will be checked at the residue level. So if you want to make it fully invisible, you would click that, and now it's totally invisible. And if you want to make it fully visible again, you click it, and now it's fully visible again. If you have some, as you can see here, some elements in the entry are not visible. And the way I know this is that the entry level visibility toggle is partial. So again, folders have a partial visibility concept. So for instance, if I made the chain L invisible again, the protein would show a partial visibility. And when it's partial, if I click it, it becomes fully visible. One thing, of course, when you make things fully visible is that it's fully visible. That means, as you can see, I turned on all the hydrogens again. So if you wanted to, after making the protein fully visible, if you wanted to hide your hydrogens again, you can use the style toolbox. Every single level of this tree has its own style toolbox, and that style toolbox is not dependent on selection at all. It just is associated with the object in the tree. So here I can just choose to hide the nonpolar hydrogens that I just accidentally turned on when I made the entire protein visible. The fit item is here as well. It's equivalent to just double-clicking on the entry, so it's not necessarily that useful. And all the other functionality is exactly like the style toolbox that Robert showed in the previous webinar. But as I said, you can do it on any entry you like, regardless of selection. So I just made the chain L invisible again. If you want to prove that, there it is, it's invisible. One of the cool things that I do with the style toolbox on the waters is, people like to style their waters differently, and this is a really quick way to do it. You go there and you make them ball and stick, and then you hide all hydrogens, and then you have these beautiful little red dots for your waters. The final functionality of the structure hierarchy that I want to show you is the search. It is, like the enter the search, it's a dynamic search. You can find all your lysines, for instance, and then once you've found them, you can use the range selection that I mentioned, the shift click, to select them all and then act on them using your style toolbox or anything else. You can also, if you're looking for invisible lysines, you can just double click as you go through your list of, so this is a way to find your search results, locate your search results one at a time. One thing to keep in mind, I showed you this range selection. You don't want to select the chain A level after you've done a search result if the intention is to select all the lysines in chain A, because in fact, selecting chain A still selects all of chain A, not just the lysines. As we can prove by clearing the search, and now you will see that all of chain A is selected. So once you've cleared the search, you can put away the search bar to save space. And speaking of space, the Workspace Navigator itself, as I said, consists of these two panes, but it's possible that just now I was working entirely in the structure hierarchy and I didn't really care about the entry list. So you may want to adjust how much space you're giving to the structure hierarchy versus the entry list. And the way to do that is if you move your mouse over this dark line above the structure hierarchy title, it will turn into this cursor. When you click and drag, you're changing the relative heights excuse me, of the two panes. If you want to go back to 50%, you can double click here and it will automatically go back to 50%. You can also entirely collapse either of the panes, only one at a time, please. There's a small bug with when you do both, and it shouldn't let you do both. So for instance, I can collapse my entry list now and only use the structure hierarchy, or I could, if I'm, say, a material science person that doesn't really use the structure hierarchy, I can collapse the structure hierarchy and just have more space for my entry list. And when you do that, it remembers, when you expand again, it remembers the relative height of the two, so you don't have to keep readjusting that. One use case for this kind of collapse expand behavior is if you are a project table user, but you would love to be able to use the structure hierarchy, and you don't necessarily want to use the space on the screen here. Perhaps you use a dual monitor setup. You can collapse your entry list and float your Workspace Navigator. And once it's floated, there's an icon for doing that, by the way. I don't know if you saw that. I was pointing to an icon. Oops, I put it away so I can find it again here. There's an icon here that's float, but in many cases you can just drag it. So once it's floating, you could put it on your other monitor if that's what you wanted to do. And to put it back, you can double click the header like that. You can float it also for other reasons. For instance, if you are working on a projector and you need, and it's got a smaller amount of space on your screen, you can float. Once the Workspace Navigator is floated, you can move it aside, and that lets you resize this much smaller. And that's actually all I have to cover. I know I went a little fast, so if there are any questions, I can start taking them now.